Somehow we have made it to fall 2023, the final new anime season of the year. And I'm not quite sure how we got here so quickly. It feels like this year just slipped right by. And a lot of the seasons this year have been pretty hectic, winter and spring especially. Summer, not as much, not as many shows to watch from that season, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with a breather season that isn't quite as filled to the brim with new shows to watch, especially given how hectic and how filled to the brim winter and spring were. But fall looks like it's going to be a pretty sizable season as well. A strong one to end the year off on. So without any further ado, let's take a look at the fall 2023 anime season. As always, we'll start off with the sequels, and I guess the best place to start would be Spy Family Season 2. Coming off of having a two-part first season last year, and with a movie coming out at the end of the year as well, we got a lot of Spy Family in pretty short succession. And I mean, it's a really popular show and a really good show. It's one of those instances where a show had so much hype going into it and it actually kind of lived up to it. I really enjoyed this show. I love how wholesome it is, while also having that right blend of comedy where like it's absurd, but not too absurd. I think it fits with the kind of tone this show is going for. And of course, it has its action. It's very well animated. It has its more serious moments. It really gives you a lot. And of course, you tie it all up with this sort of found family dynamic, which we do have a decent amount of in anime. But I don't really need to tell you to watch Spy Family. You have almost certainly already done so and decided whether you liked it or not. So certainly I am looking forward to it quite a bit. We also have The Ancient Magus' Bride returning for part 2 of its second season, and I am really looking forward to it. I love The Ancient Magus' Bride. I was so happy to finally get more of it after so many years. Of course, the issue originally was the first season caught up to the source material, and we just had to wait for there to be enough. So I'm glad we're getting more than just 12 episodes once all is said and done. I'm curious to see where the plot threads introduced in the first half from spring ultimately end up going, and I hope we don't have to wait too much longer for a third season after this. Hopefully it won't be a 5-year wait between seasons again. I just love this world, and I think season 2 has already done a really good job of fleshing the world out, making it feel more lived in. It already was very lived in, but so even though the setting has changed, moved away from the English cottage to the college, the show still feels right. Again, looking forward to this. And we have another show coming back from spring for its part 2 in Dr. Stone's third season. This season got really good, especially towards the end of its first part. I'm really looking forward to see where this current arc on the island goes. There's a lot of mystery still to be resolved, and I'm curious how it's all going to play out by the end. Not much else to say. I mean, it's Dr. Stone. It's really good. Check it out. Now, with those 3 out of the way, the sequels I'm looking forward to the most, we do have a few that I'm not necessarily not looking forward to, but not to the same extent. Start off with the Eminence in Shadow. Now, I don't think I actually talked about the Eminence in Shadow. I probably should have in my winter roundup video from earlier in the year, because it is trying to parody and make fun of this isekai with a super ridiculously overpowered protagonist. It comes off as entertaining because of that. If this was played straight, it would be completely unwatchable. But because it is taking the piss out of it, there is a sense of enjoyment to it. But that being said, it's really hard for me to personally feel that attached to this, because at the end of the day, yeah, it is still an overpowered protagonist in an isekai world with a lot of supporting characters who aren't very interesting and aren't very fleshed out. And again, this really is going to depend on if you want to see this type of show, of these kinds of isekai tropes, while still very much so living in and relishing in those isekai tropes. It's interesting, it's definitely different, and I appreciate that it does have that additional angle to it that other isekai shows do not. But I don't know exactly how thrilled I am to see more of it. I'm certainly not opposed to it, so we'll see where things go, and we'll see how crazy things get. We also have the third season of Shield Hero, which, if you remember, was announced 4 years ago alongside the second season. And speaking of the second season, it was not very well received, now was it? And I can't really disagree with how people have received it. It was kind of boring, if I'm honest. It didn't really go how I would have expected a second season of Shield Hero to go. With everything that was getting set up towards the end of the first season, I really thought we would have something a lot more climactic than what we ended up getting. Now, I was not the craziest fan of Shield Hero Season 1. In fact, I think it took a while to really become enjoyable. It really started off with a lot of issues, mostly just how unlikable basically everyone in the cast outside of Raftalia was. But it eventually kind of found its footing. I don't really think Season 2 ever quite did. And I'm not sure if the third season will really be able to fix things or not. We'll see. But I think a lot of people have probably checked out of this show since Season 2, and I'm not really sure what people are expecting for this season. I'll check it out, we'll see, but I don't know if it'll really fix the damage that has already been done. We'll find out. And the last sequel to talk about is the third season of Tokyo Revengers, which is surprising because we got season 2 in winter. I did not think we would get season 3 so soon, but here we are. And season 2 of Tokyo Revengers I didn't think was nearly as good as it probably should have been. It really felt like it did not have enough content to justify being 13 episodes. Like, the pacing really got slowed down as time went on, and I don't think it made effective use of the time it had. Probably should have only been maybe 6 or 7 episodes. And I do wonder how long this show is going to go on. Like, we have a goal, and it's like every time the characters try to achieve that goal, something new comes up to mess everything up. And like, I get that's the point of the type of show this is, with trying to change the future by going back into the past and messing around with things. But eventually you got to feel like some progress is being made, and I'm starting to wonder if we're really moving in a positive direction or if we're just kind of spinning our wheels here. We'll see, because the end of season 2 leading into this season introduced a lot of new characters and a new faction, and we don't really know how that's going to play into the story. So like, there is part of me that wants to look forward to it and think, okay, how will this add to the story? But on the other hand, I'm kind of wondering, like, maybe we need to make more of a significant leap towards a conclusion here eventually. I don't know how long the story goes on. I don't know at what point we would reasonably expect to see a conclusion, but I'm just worried the show is going to be draggy and not really filling things out as well as it should be. Maybe that's unfounded. Maybe that was just an issue isolated to season 2's arc, but I definitely have my concerns with Tokyo Revengers now. Whether they're justified or not, well, we'll see. Moving on to new shows, I do think I should mention Pluto. Now, this is going to be dropping on Netflix at the end of October. I don't think we know yet if it's all going to come out at once or if it's going to be weekly, but we're going to have 8 one-hour episodes. And it's going to be interesting because, I mean, this is Pluto. This is a manga that is incredibly well received. It's an Naoki Urasawa. It is basically an Astro Boy spinoff. It looks very well animated based on the trailers we've seen. It is something that has been in production for years, like 6 years before we learned anything more about it earlier this year. I am stoked for this, and you should be too. I mean, if you've seen Monster, you know how good Naoki Urasawa is, and I'm very curious to see how the pacing will be with hour-long episodes, and I just really want to experience the story after finally learning it was going to get an adaptation 6 years ago, and then spending 6 years wondering, is this canceled? Is it going to happen? What's going on? To now finally have it within reach. I am looking forward to it immensely. Even if, yes, it's not a seasonal show in the same way because it's Netflix and it's coming out at the end of October, but still, it's something that I think is worth mentioning here. At the very least, because of how well it's regarded. You gotta check this out, right? The Apothecary Diaries has a decent amount of hype going into it, and I can see why. It looks really interesting. It reminds me a lot of Raven of the Inner Palace from a year ago. This show where you have the imperial ancient Chinese court and somebody's there, a female character, doing a specific type of job. In the case of Raven of the Inner Palace, it was much more of like a mystical, supernatural event of the week that the titular Raven had to resolve. In this case, you have our main female character being a pharmacist, doing a lot of medical related things, possibly with some supernatural stuff going on as well. But it definitely, from the description and from the PV, gives off a lot of similar vibes to that show. And I liked Raven quite a bit. Definitely one of the more underrated shows from last year. And I have no problem seeing something that is a lot of the same. Now, the PV gives me the vibe that this will perhaps be a little more overarching in terms of certain story elements than Raven was. And it does give off this feel of some sort of romantic development happening with the main female character and the main male character, which Raven kind of had, but didn't like go all the way with it. It just kind of teased it. So maybe this could be a little bit like Snow White with the red hair, where it has that eventual romantic development. I'm not sure, but I'm definitely eager to see how this one turns out because it has a very strong reputation and it just looks and sounds really interesting. Definitely something you should keep your eye out for. One show that I'm going to talk about mainly just because of its reception and not a whole lot else is I'm in love with the Villainess. And I've never really watched, I think, any of the Villainess shows that have come out within the past 3 years. And there have been a lot of them, more than you might have realized. But they haven't really gotten the best reception, so I've never really felt too much of a need to check them out. Even the original, Villainess show from 2020, it got talked about when the first season was airing, and then, as it went on, people kind of soured on it, and even more so once the second season came out, so I just never bothered with it. So why am I putting this here? One, because it has a strong reputation for its source material. It is well regarded, it has been hyped up, so I feel like I should at least acknowledge it and keep my eyes on it to see how it pans out. But also because because the description describes something that is a bit different from some of the other Villainess shows that have come out. The main character is not getting reincarnated or thrown into the life of the Villainess. She's someone else in this video game that she's living in now. Her goal is actually to make the Villainess fall in love with her. And while these Villainess shows have had girls' love aspects to them, usually by creating a harem that has both male and female characters in it, a la the Villainess show from 2020, to have the main character not be the Villainess and have the explicit goal of making the Villainess fall in love with her, that's different, and it's much more explicitly focused on the girls' love angle rather than just creating a harem that happens to have female characters, and maybe they'll tease some girls' love stuff, who knows. Now, if this just ends up being like a tease, and it starts off with promoting this girl's love aspect and then it doesn't actually follow through, then that'll be quite the bait and switch, and that won't necessarily be something I'll look on very fondly. But if this actually commits to it, I think it will be noteworthy at the absolute least for actually going that far after having a lot of shows, just in general, within recent anime that tease some sort of girl's love aspect and then don't follow through on it. So because this is doing something different, and because of how its source material is regarded, I thought it was worth throwing on here. We'll see how it turns out. Even if I'm not the foremost authority on Villainess shows, I can at least recognize that there's at least something unique about this compared to other shows that have come out recently. Undead Unlock is, I guess, the shonen show of this season, albeit perhaps one that's not as inherently hyped up as some of the other shonen shows we've gotten recently. Maybe because of its tone, because it doesn't seem to be as obviously dark on the surface as other shonens have been lately. But it's one of those things that you read the premise and you kind of wonder, maybe this will be darker than you would initially expect, because this is a show that kind of revolves around suicide to an extent. The main female character has some sort of condition that makes it so that she brings misery to other people. The exact nature of it isn't clear at first, but she basically resolves that once she doesn't have anything else worth living for, she's going to kill herself. At the beginning of the show, she finishes her favorite manga and she's like, okay, that's it, I'm done. She gets ready to kill herself, throw herself in front of a train. But somebody else shows up and does it first, and he ends up regenerating. And we find out that this guy, Andy, wants to die but can't. So now the show becomes these two characters teaming up with their weird supernatural abilities and trying to find a way for Andy to kill himself in the coolest, bestest possible way. I guess the implication is that our main character now has a goal in life, so she isn't going to necessarily kill herself, but maybe she will afterwards. I don't entirely know. But like that's kind of morbid, right? Literally, because characters whose purpose is to kill themselves, like that's not necessarily what you would expect a show to be about. And I certainly wouldn't blame anyone for reading this premise and saying, yeah, no, that's a bit too much. While this certainly appears like it's going to be more of like a comedic leaning shonen, like you would typically expect, I don't know, like I'm curious to see how this will handle its tone, given what it's about and the type of demographic it's shooting for. And of course you have like factions and organizations that find out about these characters' abilities and want to try and take advantage of it, so there will be some semblance of an overarching plot beyond just finding the coolest way to kill themselves, and who knows if that'll actually be something the show gets to by the end of it, or if we'll even get the full story. This is going to be 2 core, that has been confirmed. It's also going to be streaming exclusively, as I understand, on Hulu, which is interesting, but it could also bar some people from watching it. So I don't know how much it's streaming exclusively on Hulu will make a difference in terms of how popular it is, how watched it is, but something to keep in mind. It could be a nice benefit for certain people who have Hulu. It could be a detriment if people want to watch it on other places like Crunchyroll or Netflix, but that's where we are. This show I've seen hype for since it was only rumored well over a year ago, so I felt I'd be remiss if I did not include it on here. I'm curious to see exactly how it'll turn out, given the different kind of premise it has. If it'll just be sort of a typical shonen romp, or if it'll maybe do something different. And finally, I gotta talk about, easily, I would say, the most hype new show of this upcoming season. Frieren, or Frieren, I'm gonna go with Frieren, Beyond Journey's End. And that title basically kind of describes what this is. Frieren is our main character. She's an elf, and she has just spent a decade going on this massive adventure around the world with her party of comrades. And they settle down and they reflect on what they've done. And then because she's an elf, she lives a much longer life, and they little by little die off, leaving her alone. But she ends up with a new apprentice, and they decide they're going to go all around the world again, revisit a lot of the places that she has already gone to. And as they do that, she reflects on her time with her previous previous party, grows to appreciate them more, and it strengthens her bonds with these people who she spent a lot of time with, but unfortunately have now passed on. Really interesting premise to show us after a massive journey has already happened, but still include a journey nevertheless, even if it's one that's familiar to one of these characters. And it certainly appears like it's going to be a bit more of a slice of lifey, episodic, character-driven story, mostly focusing on Frieren reflecting on her bonds with these people who are no longer around, while, of course, forging a new bond with her apprentice here. As I understand, there are going to be elements of action in this, but that's not the main selling point here. It is much more of a slow, slice of lifey kind of story. And I'm all for that. That may not appeal to everyone, but nevertheless, this show has an incredible reputation behind it from its source material. And it's going to have a full 2-hour first episode premiere at the end of the month, which certainly suggests that there's some confidence in this. So I'm sure you've already heard of Frieren if you've looked into the fall shows at all, and you've probably decided whether you're going to watch it or not, and you probably will. I would be surprised if another show ends up being bigger than this one, but I've certainly been wrong before. So that is everything that I wanted to talk about from the upcoming fall 2023 anime season. Looks like it's going to be a pretty good one, with the sequels and these new shows giving us all something to chew on. As always, let me know down below if there were any shows that I should have talked about that I skipped over and why I was wrong to skip over them, and also what your thoughts are on the 11 shows that we talked about. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And as always, take care everyone. Look forward to the next video.